I'd like to invite you to take out your message guide this morning. It's available in your worship folder. Follow along in that way if you would like. As we continue in our little series that we began a couple weeks ago called For Better, or Best. We've been looking at the topic, the whole issue of marriage and relationships, and today we're going to be beginning the next 4 weeks. You say 4 weeks, oh my stars. But we're going to spend 4 weeks in Genesis chapter 2, and so if you want to turn there in your Bibles, you can do so. It is at the very beginning, open. You've got the cover, you've got the table of contents, and basically, boom, you're there, Genesis chapter 2. And you can follow along there in the Word. The first 2 weeks we were together, we spent some time and we started by talking about the idea of preparing. That God desires, and it's a good thing to prepare for things. We spend time preparing for things. And one of the things that we ought to spend more time preparing for are our marriages. We take a lot of time to prepare for dates. We take a lot of time to prepare for the wedding. But we don't often think about the fact that what comes after those things, or the byproduct or the end product of those things, is a life together, and to take the time to seriously prepare and to think about how is that going to be, what are we going to do with that. And so in terms of preparing, and not just for that particular relationship, but I'm thinking about preparing for unpacking the Word over these next couple of weeks, I needed to lay some groundwork, some lift-off kind of work, by helping us understand a little bit about our culture and how things have changed in our culture. And so that first week we talked about some ways, if you would, that our culture and our understanding of culture has shifted. It's shifted in our understanding of three important relationships, or three important areas. The first is our relationship with God. The second was our relationship with each other, or our relationship with our spouse. And then the final was our relationship, or the whole idea of how do we even find the person who is going to be our husband or wife, that's going to be our spouse. And these subtle shifts in the way that we look at those things led to the second week. And we looked at the idea of problems. And in this idea, one problem in particular, and that was the issue of cohabitation, of people living together. We live in a day and an age where many people kind of accomplish the things that are a normal part of moving towards marriage. They just kind of accomplish them in the wrong order. Many people get to the product, if you would, they just get there on many different ways. And the Lord has laid out and made it clear to us in His Word how He desires for us to approach these things. And one of the things that happens is when we don't approach it the way that He desires, we find that there are consequences. And many people in our culture, much more than we talk about, and certainly much more than pastors talk about, and that's maybe why I'm talking about it, is that there are some pretty significant consequences to, if you would, being intimate before you have a mate. The idea of being intimate, doing things that are intended for your mate prior to actually being married or coming together, creates a number of unique problems or situations. In this particular case, when we talk about living together, we find that all of a sudden we find that it doesn't lead for a strong relationship. It doesn't lay a good foundation. Those relationships, historically we found, we called it the book of science, that those relationships are less sticky. They're less strong. They tend to be less skilled at dealing with things. They're less safe in terms of even the issues of domestic violence than those that we might call their married counterparts. And so today we want to kind of build on these two ideas and say, all right, so our world isn't thinking right, and it's led us to do some things that aren't helping us on this road. So what should we do? What should we do? What does God's Word have to say about this? So what are the principles that God gives us so that we can have success in this relationship? And so today I want to continue on, and we're going to do it from Genesis chapter 2 over the next couple of weeks. And we're going to unpack what I think and what I would call a seminal verse, or verses with regard to this important relationship. Have you ever noticed the difference between boys and girls? I don't think it was more pronounced for me than when we had Caroline, our daughter. We had 2 boys, and then, if you would, we had Caroline. Now the boys, you know what boys are like. What do? How do boys communicate? Make noises. You know, and they play with things. That's boys. But then Caroline came. And that was completely different. Like, Caroline she actually had conversation. And she talked about things. And it was way different. It was a stoner. And so when all of a sudden a lot changed in our home when we had Caroline. And we had to make some adjustments. We noticed things we hadn't noticed before. Those differences, if you would, carry on to adulthood. They carry on to adulthood. Guys think about things different than women think about things, and women think about things different than men think about these things. They approach things in relationships in different areas of our life. They approach them differently, from a different perspective. As they get older, if you would, you might put it this way, men become more manly, and women become more womanly. And it seems that the spans there kind of can become huge. I want to suggest that if and this goes into where we're going this morning, let me share. These are 2 books that I use to kind of work with people who are in pre-engagement counseling or premarital counseling. They're excellent books at helping you understand the difference between how a guy thinks about something and how a woman thinks about something, how men and women process things differently. When you go to the store, and this is sometimes true, I find I don't spend a lot of time going to the store with my wife to buy clothing, okay? Because my wife, and many, I think this is kind of a generalization here, but women like to look, and they like to check out, like to look at, all the blouses, all the tops. They like to look at all, and not only at the one store, they want to go, let's go try over here and look. They're not quick to seal the deal on something like that. But if you're a guy, let's be honest, guys, what do? If you're looking for a shirt, the first shirt that fits, that's in a color that's not ridiculous, that's the shirt you buy, and you walk out of the store, and it's done. That's it. Learning to come to grips with these differences and how these things kind of work out in a relationship is important. Why is it that statistics tell us that better than 50% of our marriages end in divorce? Well, I think it's largely because we kind of have lost sight of some very basic but very biblical truths that will build marriages that honor Him in our day-to-day life. And these are principles that help us come to grips with and to deal with some of the things that over time we have, the things that make us different, that see us process things in different ways. Now, the 2 verses in Genesis chapter 2 that we're going to look at take us really back to the beginning. And there are 4 spiritual or principal musts that come out of these verses that I think will change and can change our hearts and will change our lives and can change our relationships. And help us to understand, by going back to the beginning, how did this all really start? How did this get started? Well, the initial marriage relationship was back, if you would, when God created the world. God said, what I'm making here is good. this is good, that's good, this is good, this is, but the first thing that wasn't good was if you would, the aloneness of Adam. And it's not because he couldn't put colors together, so he was always looking crazy. And it's not because he lost his car keys or locked himself out. I gotta admit to you, yesterday, I went to Elizabeth Spencer's 11th birthday party. Debbie took off early because we were going in separate cars because I was going to run some errands after she was. So I'm on the phone with somebody, Debbie leaves. I thought I had put my keys in my pocket. I walk out of the townhouse, close the door, boom, I'm standing on the steps. I have no way to get in. I have no way to get into the car. It's 26 or 7 degrees, and Debbie is gone. So I start calling Debbie. And so she's out running her errands, and she wasn't checking her phone right then. When she gets to the party, she checks her phone, and she sees these texts. I'm locked out of the house. Come save me. I'm freezing. I'm not going to last. Hibernating. And it started to snow, and I'm on the phone with my daughter, and I'm like, you're going to have to peel me off the front porch here. I'm just going to be nice. It wasn't because men do things like that. There was something bigger going on that God was addressing. There was an outflow issue, if you would, for Adam. There was no place for Adam to pour his love. He was receiving great love from God, who would come and walk with him in the cool of the day. But who was there for Adam to, if you would, outflow into on that person's side? So what happens is God puts Adam to sleep, and he takes a rib from his side, and he forms the woman. We know this story from the first part of Genesis. And he makes for him what is called a helpmate, or a partner. And when he sees her, what is she called? She's called woman. Whoa, man. Because she's amazing. And that takes us and brings us to Genesis 2, and these are our verses for today. It says this, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. So today I want to focus on the first must from these verses that God leads us to. And the first priority, or the first principle, is a principle of priority. In our marriages, we have to live out a vow of priority. A vow of priority. What do I mean by that? And today's transforming truth has to do with priority. It's very simply this. It's next to Christ, your spouse must be your number one priority. Next to Christ, your spouse needs to be your number one priority. I was spending some time in the car the other day, traveling back and forth, and I happened to be listening to the radio, and I believe it was WGAW I was listening to, and I think that the show that was on at that point was Dennis Prager. And somebody was sitting in for him, and he was interviewing a lady who was talking about a book she had recently written. And in the thing where she talks about herself, the biography of the author, if you would, she made this comment, and he caught this. The person's name, and then Christ follower, wife, mother, and then I think it was like dog lover or something like that. And he made a comment to her about how she got the priority right. How she got the fact that her relationship with Christ, her relationship with God was number one, but that before her children, her relationship with her husband was the next in order of priority. And she made a comment in the discussion, and she said basically this. She said, I realize that if my relationship with my husband is not what it ought to be, if it is not the priority before my children, there is no way for me to be the mother and for us to be the mom and dad for our children that we need to be if our relationship isn't what it ought to be. And I thought that was very telling. Very telling. That next to Christ, our spouse must be our number one priority. Let me tell you, if you're here today and you're not married, this still makes sense and it still applies to you. Because for all of us, Whether married or single, whether divorced, a widow or a widower, Christ ought to be our number one priority. Our number one priority. You cannot be the husband or wife, you cannot be the friend, you cannot be the grandma, you cannot be anything to anyone that you ought to be if Christ is not the number one priority of your life. If you're not growing in your Christ-likeness, if you're not having done with lesser things, if you're not getting rid of the flesh and putting on the Spirit, if you're not taking off the old and putting on the new, then you're not being for others what you need to be. And Christ needs to be the number one priority. One of the things, and I've heard this when I've talked with people about their relationship, I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody say to me, why is it that nobody told me that? Because often we walk into our relationship and we do everything that we can to make the relationship work. But we forget the most important relationship, or the primary relationship, which would allow that to become what it ought to be, what it need to be. Vow number one has to be this, that next to Christ, my spouse is number one. Scripture puts it this way, and again, it's verse 24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The key word here today, and this is our study word, if you would, and each week there'll be one word that we hit on that really we want to unpack and see the import of. It is the word azab. Azab. Can you say that with me? Azab. Now you speak Hebrew. You know Hebrew. Azab. And it's the idea to loosen, to relinquish, or to leave. To loosen, to relinquish, or leave. In other words, when a man marries a woman, the scripture says, he loosens or he relinquishes his relationship with his mother and father. Why is this important? Why is this important? Well, before you got married, your most important relationship should be with your mom and your dad. Growing up, we went to the doctor, we had regular checkups, the whole deal when you're a kid. But the doctor that we grew up going to retired, and an Asian doctor, a Korean doctor, took his practice. And we thought it was comical at kids because he had a funny accent. But every time we would go to the doctor, he would say this, after the, very healthy, everything good. You have problem? Talk to mom and dad. You have problem? Talk to mom and dad. What's he saying here? After marriage, you loosen that relationship with mom and dad. You relinquish, if you would, the relationship that you have there, and you enter into this new relationship with your spouse. It's not that you don't, but you always honor them. But the priority now changes from mom and dad to your spouse. And God designed it this way. You relinquish the parental relationship and embrace and pursue the marriage relationship. You become one flesh. You become one flesh. Now guys, God, I'm going to talk to the guys here for a second. God instructs us to give up our lives for two things. Really, two things. And notice, if you would, what's not on the list. Okay? Our career is not on the list. Our job is not on the list. Success, money, our friendships, our hobbies are not on the list. But we give up our lives for Christ because he gave up his life for us. And secondly, we give it up for our wife. Two things. I give up, I surrender my life, I relinquish my life to Christ. I allow him to enter my life, to become my Lord, to become my Savior. And second, I relinquish or I loosen, I leave behind my desires for my wife. This is what it says in Ephesians 5. It says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. How did Christ love the church? Christ went to the cross for the church, for you and for me. We die to ourselves, and we live for her. She becomes our priority. We become the priority of the other. Now, with this kind of foundational thought in mind, what goes on, what happens between when we get married and trouble? What happens? Well, I mean, really simply, a different priority enters in. You have that moment when you first meet, when all of the songs on the radio make sense. I heard that and I was like, wow, that's kind of an interesting way to put it. It's like you listen to the songs on the radio and they're talking about love and they're talking about all of this stuff, and then all of a sudden you meet that person and you're like, wow, that all makes sense now. You know, all of those cards that you ever saw in the store, all that mushy stuff on them, and you're like, ugh. All of a sudden they all make sense. Why? Because you met her or you met him. You know, you see each other, you go out, you go on a date, he buys you things, she smells great, he smells okay. You know? And then all of a sudden, you get married, you're each one, you're the number one priority, and then something happens, something enters in, and many times it's this. All of a sudden, Junior arrives. And all of a sudden, all of the attention kind of goes to Junior. And things kind of change. Things happen. Somewhere along the mix, the priorities leave each other. They go other places. It could be children. It could be work. It could be friends. It could be your business endeavors. It could be your hobbies or your buddies. It could be sports. It could be physical fitness. It could be all kinds of things. And then you wake up down the road and you're no longer each other's priority because the priority has changed. A couple thoughts for you to think about with regard to this. First, things that destroy many marriages are good things and not bad things. The things that become our priorities, if you would, or steal and break that priority place that God designs and desires for us to have, many of those things are not bad things. They're actually good things. It's easy for us to blame, if you would, the other person when this kind of happens, but that's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily bad. It can be a good thing. But what we see second, I want to suggest, is this, is that the good things then become the enemy of the best. The best things, like kids. They're incredible blessing, but there's a balancing act there when you have your kids to keep that priority in the right place, but to also take care of your kids. And it's easy to pour our lives into our kids. And let me just be honest with you. I mean, regardless, talking about business or your employment, I have struggled with this. I have struggled with this from the very beginning. I have struggled with keeping ministry in its right spot. Why? Because it's so easy. It's so easy to be, there's always something more to do. There's always someone else to call. There's always another note to be written. There's always another message to be preached. And it's hard to keep those things in order. And I don't always do it well. I don't know what it is that is the challenge priority-wise for you. But all of us have these challenges. For some of us, it could be the kids. What happens? When do we ever have a date night, if you would? I don't know if date night, when you're married, you're married. I don't know if you need a date night. Maybe there's a different word for it. But when do you get time together? When do you carve out those moments? One of the greatest ways that you can love your kids is by investing in your marriage. Learn that now. Invest in your marriage. Career, outside the house stuff. Good things can be more damaging than the bad things. And good things can keep us from the best things. We have to keep our priorities straight. Ann Landers, some of you will know who that is. Others of you will not. But I thought this was an interesting quote. Ann Landers said this: "Neglect the rest of the world if you have to, but never neglect each other." Neglect the rest of the world if you have to, but never neglect each other. Now, let me just say that there are times when things are tough, there are challenges, and you need to give some extra time to something else. If you would, you kind of have to readjust your priority categories in order to deal with some challenges. I found that to be true when I was in seminary, that I'm full-time in ministry, I'm going to school full-time, and just to get that knocked out and to get it done, there were some adjustments that we made. But that was for a season. If the norm of your life is that your priorities are not where they should be, then you've got an issue. But that together, you can come together and talk about your priorities and make adjustments for a season. But you can't neglect that relationship. An interesting thing to do maybe this week or as part of the study that's on the back of your guide is, what is it that you find are the things that steal your priorities away from where they should be? What are the things that go on in your daily life or in your relationships or in your home or whatever that keep your priorities out of whack? That don't have Christ in the first place and your spouse in the second place, your kids in the third, and perhaps your dog in the fourth? What are the things that have your priorities out of whack? Make a list of those things that are distracting. If you're not married, you can make a list too. What are the things that keep Jesus from being that place? Is it emails or phones or work or all different kinds of things? I'm talking about priorities. There's a verse over in Hebrews 13, verse 4. It says this, as Paul writes, he says, "Marriage is honorable among all, the marriage bed or the bed undefiled. Fornicators and adulterers God will judge." What defiles your bed? What defiles your bed? What are the things that enter into your life that take your priority, if you would, that you want to be giving to your spouse, your husband, or your wife, that cause it to go somewhere else? That defile the bed? What are those things? So, you are my priority. That's where we started. What kind of a priority, what priorities do you have? So, what are two biblical thoughts, if you would, that we can embrace here? What are some things that we can do to make this practical? And here's where change, and this is where it kind of gets painful, maybe. So, if next to Christ, my spouse is my number one priority, and in my other relationships, my husband, my mom and my dad, all of my other areas of life, I need to loosen, I need to relinquish those things so that that stays in its proper place. How do I do that? How do I do that practically? Let me suggest first that you need to practice the priority. It doesn't matter what you claim or what you know to be true, it matters what you do. You have to practice it. You have to actually put it into practice or work it out in your daily life. Jesus had something to say about that, and he said it over in Luke chapter 6. This is what Jesus said. He said, "But he who heard and did nothing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." There are people who know so much, and it's so interesting because this is exactly what in our Bible study group this morning he was talking about in the material. He says there are so many people who know so much. He says, but they fall so short on the issue of application and making it real in their daily lives. So you have to practice the priority. You have to make it real. You can't just know about the fact that being a person of the Word and being in the Word and allowing the Word to transform your mind and to transform you have to be doing those things. Practicing that priority. If you hear the words and you don't do anything with them, it really doesn't matter what you know at that point or what you believe. Only practice leads you to the product. And you need to practice it. So if you want to have the right priorities in life, then you have to practice that. Here's a question I ask. Do you feel like, by the way that you live, that next to God, she or he or you are my number one priority? Is that being practiced in your relationship? That's a hard question. But it's one that ought to be asked. So the question is, what will be the priority of my marriage? What will be the practice of my marriage? You practice it and you evaluate it by the Word. But second, beyond practicing it, you need to protect it. You need to build safeguards or hedges into your relationship that help you to keep that first place thing in its first place. Because it's not easy. And you have to do that at all costs. You have to protect that priority. Jesus says this, John chapter 10, verse 10, "The thief does not come except to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I have come that you would have life and have it more abundantly." Satan's going to desire to steal and to turn your priorities away from where they ought to be. The spiritual enemy comes and has one mission, and that's to steal, to kill, and to destroy your relationship with the Lord, with your spouse. What do? We protect that. Protect that as best we can. Have regular times together. Build those things in. If you have to, put it on your calendar. These are our moments together. When somebody calls, sorry, I'm busy then. I'm busy. You don't have to say what you're busy doing. It's not necessarily their business. You could be busy spending time with your wife or your husband, and you know what? That's okay. If Pastor Ruben calls you and says, "Hey, can we get together and have a meeting on whatever night?" and that's the time you've carved out to be with your husband or be your wife, that's okay. Pastor Ruben says it's okay to say, "You know what? I'm busy that night." Don't cut short your time with your husband and wife in keeping it a priority in order to have a meeting with me. And be bold enough to say, "You know what? This is a priority to me. We don't have any other time with this, and so can we find a different slot to put that in?" You have to practice it, but you also have to build in some protections of that priority. So the question is, how will you protect it? What will you do to keep number one, number one? What will you do to keep number one, number one? Some of you spend a lot of time, in the church I was at before, there were people who spent a lot of time on the road. How do you balance for that when that's the norm of your life, when you're gone all the time? How do you do that? How do you do that when you have kids? When he's going soccer over here, she's going over to basketball over there, they're involved in clubs, they're involved in extracurricular activities. How do you carve out that time to keep the priority the priority? Let me suggest this. Beyond your marriage, to what degree is your family, for not only mom and dad, but for the kids, to what degree is your family a priority? Long gone are the days when families sat down and actually had a meal together. Remember that? Maybe I'm just being old. But there's value in that. As much as you need to work on primarily and in the first place having a relationship that's priority with your husband and wife, you need to have some kind of a priority relationship in your family so that your family gets time together. How will you build in the spiritual priorities that you want to as a parent if you don't have time with your kids? How does that happen? So So next to Christ, my spouse is my number one priority. And next to my spouse, for us as a couple, our kids are our next priority. And we have to be careful to actually practice that, but also to protect that in our daily lives. If we don't, then we cannot be the parents, and we certainly will not be the people that God wants us to be. We won't have the marriage that God wants us to have. It will be weak. When challenged, it will stumble. We need to work on building those things in for better or best. Everything that goes on out in the world is going to challenge that priority. At the very least, it will say what goes on outside of your marriage is as important as your marriage. And let me tell you, there's no relationship apart from the relationship with Christ that is as important as your relationship to your spouse. Principle number one, priority. Priority. When you come together, you loosen, you relinquish that relationship with your husband, with your parents, with whatever. And you come together as one flesh. You come together with your wife, with your husband. And you put that relationship in its proper place. Today's a